All right, welcome back to Velshi and Rule. Moments ago, Republicans who met with President Trump at the White House said that he will not sign the legislation that overwhelmingly passed the Senate to keep the government open until February. Joining me now to share his thoughts is a member of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Will Hurd of Texas. Congressman Hurd, thanks for being here. I wanted to talk to you about other things, and we possibly still can, about Syria, because you've got a background that really helps us understand what success looks like in Syria. But I have to talk to you about what's just developed. Sure. This now gets back into your department, right? You, as members of Congress, who were going to address a bill that the Senate passed last night to keep the government open until February, a continuing resolution, keep it funded at the same levels. And now that looks like it's in great doubt, both because we don't know if the House is going to face a bill or vote on a bill and whether the president's going to sign a bill. Tell me where things stand, in your opinion.
Where things stand is that the American people actually sent us up to Washington, D.C. to get things done, not burn the place down. And so we should be able to fund the government. Now, we have funded 8 out of the 24 major departments and agencies. We have these remaining to do. The Senate was able to pass this short-term continuing resolution. I think the House should take that up. And, you know, let's see how many votes that has, and does it have a veto-proof majority? We don't know the answer to that. And also this fallacy that a wall equals border security. I might have more border than any other member of Congress, 820 miles of the border. I spent a decade as an undercover officer in the CIA chasing bad guys. We are monitoring or keeping track of the wrong metric. It's not how many miles of wall that is going to keep us safe. It's, are we keeping bad people, and are we keeping drugs out of our country? And the best way to do that is with technology and manpower. Building a wall from sea to shining sea is the most expensive and least effective way to do border security.
Let me just tell you what the White House has just said about this, Congressman. President Trump just met with Republican members of the House. Not surprisingly, they all feel strongly about border security, stopping the flow of drugs, as you just mentioned, stopping human trafficking, stopping terrorism. We protect nations all over the world, but Democrats are unwilling to protect our nation. We urgently need funding for border security, and that includes a wall. Sarah Sanders put that out. Now, look, they might have been listening to your conversation with me just moments ago, because you said those things, right? We need to stop the flow of drugs, stop human trafficking, and no country is a country if it can't control its borders. We need to get away from the name-calling for a second, and the Democrats want this and Republicans want this. I think overwhelmingly all Americans want some version of border security. We seem to be at a place between $1.6 billion for funding it versus $5 billion for a wall. And it would occur to me that there is some space to discuss this. There is some space to say, hey, what can we do that we all agree is border security that is not simply in the service of living up to a promise that Donald Trump made in the election to build a wall that Mexicans are going to pay for?
Look, Ali, I agree with you. There is a space for that. And ultimately, I think it's a bill called the Smart Wall. This is a bill that I actually introduced, and that uses technology and manpower, addressing root causes. You know, a lot of the conversation, we haven't been focusing, what are the root causes of illegal immigration to our country? That's violence and lack of economic opportunities in places like the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. We should be talking about plussing up the State Department's budget, USAID's budget. We should be working with Mexico on this issue. The new Mexican president, President Lopez Obrador, just announced $30 billion in economic development for Central America. We should be partnering with them on that to address those root driving that is causing illegal immigration to come to our country. But we are not using the latest and greatest technology along the border. A smart wall using technology, we can deploy that for under $1 billion, all through the entire border, and do that within a year. That's how we secure our border. That's how we have operational control of our border and making sure that we're protecting the American people.
And I dare say there would be a lot of Democrats who would support that.
Absolutely. Earlier this year, Pete Aguilar is a Democrat from California. I'm a Republican from Texas. We worked on something called the USA Act, which worked on border security. It had a permanent legislative fix at DACA, and it addressed some of the root causes in Central America. We've whipped that bill. It has more than 218 votes. We just were unable to get it to the floor because leadership wouldn't bring it up. So there are real solutions to this problem. Why this leadership team doesn't want to bring those to the floor, why we don't want to see a vote, I don't know the answer to that. But I'd like to say, hey, everybody has an idea. Let's bring it to the floor. Whichever gets 218 votes, that goes on to the president's desk.
Let me ask you about the countries in Central America that you just spoke about. You said something very important. By the way, a lot of people don't know this. U.S. government has increased funding to those countries, not decreased as the president has threatened, that if the people don't stop coming from those countries, going to cut off funding. It is the lack of economic opportunity and security in those countries that is the problem. And by the way, that's a global problem, right? As long as people are not secure economically or feel safe in their countries, they'll go to some place that is. In this case, in the Western Hemisphere, America is that place. Do we need to have a more sophisticated discussion about what to do to keep people in their home country so that we're not facing mass exodus of people to America because they think they might have a life that they can live in the countries that they're from?
100%. I think that's the role of State Department, that's the role of USAID in order to do that. We have seen cases. I was recently down in those countries about 45, 60 days ago, and we saw how these programs that were addressing the police force in certain communities, you train them, you teach them community policing. That drives down violence, and we've seen a decrease in the amount of people that are coming from that country because they're addressing the issue of violence. So this works. That's why we also can't do things like in Syria, pull our U.S. troops out of Syria, because what is that going to do? That's going to cause thousands of deaths in Syria. That's going to increase the Syrian refugee crisis. Right. 6.2 million people have been displaced to Syria. Guess where they're at? They're in Jordan. They're in other parts of the Middle East that are having an impact on our allies. Same thing we can talk about Yemen. Nobody's talking about what's happening in Venezuela. So these are some of the issues that you have to address those, because it's creating this pressure, and you're building a group of folks that are going to start being distrustful of the United States and some of these other governments, and you're going to create the new ISIS, you're going to create the new Al-Qaeda.
And there are reports that there are 20 to 30,000 ISIS members, 10 times what it was when we defeated Al-Qaeda. So the issue here is when you have failed states, as you mentioned, like Yemen, like where Venezuela is going right now, where Syria is, it's not just that we're looking at those potential ISIS members who are still around. It's that the president tweeted today that Iran and Russia are very happy to hear that he wants to withdraw from Syria. That's the opposite of the truth. They're thrilled that America is prepared to get out of those places because they would like that influence in the Middle East.
When it comes to national security issues and foreign policy issues, I always think, what do your allies think of the response? What do your adversaries or your enemies think of this response? The response by Syria, Iran, and Russia last night to the president's decision to pull troops out, as you said, Ali, was being ecstatic. And our allies were upset. The French had to announce today that they're keeping their troops in Syria because they know the importance of this. Bottom line, when it comes to Syria, is we are protecting the United States homeland by having a small footprint in that country. 2,000 of our best that are there, that are working with anti-ISIS forces, that are working with anti-Assad forces, and you compare that to what the Russians and the Iranians have in Syria. When you look at Bashar al-Assad footprint in that country, it's his country. We are being able to stem the tide of terrorism with a very small footprint. And now, if we pull that out, guess what happens? Everybody that's been working with us have a target on their back. Bashar al-Assad has already proven that he's a brutal dictator and are willing to kill innocent people. You're going to see that happen, and it's all because of this decision to pull out of Syria.
Congressman, while I've got you, I want to talk about the Russia investigation because you're on the House Intel Committee. The acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, has been critical of the Mueller probe. He now says he won't recuse himself, and the Department of Justice Ethics Committee seems to agree with that. Now, just moments ago, the ranking House Intel member, Adam Schiff, the Democrat, called for his recusal. Just listen to this with me.
This is somebody who auditioned for the part as acting Attorney General by going on TV and railing against the Mueller investigation, talking about how he could secretly subvert the investigation. That creates a real impropriety, and the public can have no confidence in his work. So Congress needs to see this ethics opinion. Whether recusal is mandated or not, it is clearly called for here, because you have to avoid not only impropriety, but the appearance of impropriety.
Congressman Will Hurd, what do you think? You know more than most of us do about this stuff because of your role on the Intel Committee. Should Matt Whitaker recuse himself?
Well, first off, I think Bob Mueller should be allowed to turn over every rock, inspect every lead, and make sure that his investigation goes to the end. If the Ethics Committee and IGs have come in and say that this is not conflict of interest, I have trust in the Ethics Committees and the Inspector Generals of the various departments. I've worked with them on a number of other issues. I think Bob Mueller is showing that he's serious. He's starting to put a lot of people in jail. And if that's any indication of things to come, he should be allowed to continue his work, and I think he's going to be able to do that. I think earlier in your program you had Rod Rosenstein come in and say that the Department of Justice is going to cross every T and dot every I and do things properly, and I think the Department of Justice has a history of doing that.
Congressman, I'll let you go, but your guess at this point, are we going to have a government shutdown or not?
We still have many hours in the day. There's many of us that do not want to see this happen, and we want to make sure, let's not exacerbate the problem. One of the agencies that would be shut down if we go to a government shutdown is the Department of Homeland Security. Border Patrol is already dealing with a tough job. Let's not make their job even tougher by adding the uncertainty of whether or not they're going to get paid a few days before Christmas.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.